Today on Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS, my old friend Dayna O'Gorman. You've seen her on Our Turf and Real Hawk Talk. And of course, my former co-host on the Field Goals podcast. We're going to recap that crazy Monday night game. How are we feeling about that a couple of days later after we've let it sink in? Is Geno Smith gaining respect? Is the narrative starting to change nationally and even in the fan base about him as a quarterback? Does Dayna, who loves defense, you know that about her, she still have concerns about that side of the ball, even given the fact that they didn't have all their horses on Monday? Who are her favorite players so far? And has anyone disappointed her? Can't wait to get to this. It's Dayna O'Gorman helping me recap the first quarter of the season. Not exactly, but almost. The quarter poll recap coming up today on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Shout out to BetUS for sponsoring this video. If you're interested in supporting the channel, best way to do that is hit that thumbs up, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell for notification of future episodes. But also, all the other ways that you can support the channel are down below in the description. Not a lot of news today, just 2 days removed now from that great Monday night game. I've had a chance to rewatch it. I'll have some more distinct thoughts over the next couple of days about that performance. Some things that stood out to me on the rewatch. The only real news so far, Jason Peters, as expected, he met with the team a couple of weeks ago, now 42 years old. Signed to the practice squad for the Seahawks. I've had a lot of questions. Do you think that's a hedge against tackle? You think that's a hedge against guard? He played both last year. Honestly, I think it's a big nothing burger. I think in a perfect world, we won't have to see him on the 53-man roster. I think it's just a break glass in case of emergency type move. And it also speaks more to the lack of options that are out there right now. I mean, a bunch of you have said, let's trade for a guy, trade for a guard. It's just do yourself a favor. Go look at 32 teams, the other 31 rosters. Look at their records and ask who's trading a good guard at this point. If you're a bad team and you have a good guard, are you going to get rid of that guy? They're hard to find. And if you're a good team, certainly you're not going to take a vital piece out of your offensive line. I just think Peters is a guy that, they value. Obviously, they think he could still play if need be. But think about what the bottom of that roster looks like for offensive linemen for the Seahawks right now. Sataoa Laumea, Michael Jarrell, 2 late-round draft picks, but guys that I think have starter upside. Who better to mentor those players than Jason Peters? I mean, think what he can do for Michael Jarrell. That's exciting. And even Laumea, and even Christian Haynes, who, as I rewatched the game, did really stand out to me. Thought he was better than Anthony Bradford, and it'll be interesting to see that as the week progresses, see if maybe this is the week we see a shift there at the right guard position as the Seahawks get ready to take on the New York Giants. Well, let's get into this. This is my conversation earlier today with Dayna O'Gorman of Our Turf, Real Hawk Talk, and formerly my co-host on Field Goals. Welcome back, Dayna. It has been a while. I know it's going to make my viewers happy to see your shining face again. How are you?
I am good. Thank you so much for having me back. It's an interesting time in the season. I actually like this break, this quarter break. I think you can learn a lot from a team in the first few games.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as annoying as it is to me that it's not perfect math now, it's not perfectly the quarter break, I still like to take stock. Right.
Yeah,
and
it is really annoying.
We knew coming into this season that it was going to be a year of transition, that there would be times along the way that things would look great. And there were times along the way that we would see some of the growing pains. And I think maybe with how the season started and going 3-0, that some fans forgot that there's going to be some evolution along the way, right? How do you feel just generally, before we get into some more specifics, about where they are after 4 games?
Well, they're better than I thought they would be. To be totally bluntly honest with you, I had in our prediction show that Seattle would be 2-2 right now. I expected a lot out of Miami. Of course, not you can't ever assume an injury. So when you're looking at it on paper, I thought Miami was going to be very difficult. And I have the Lions going to the Super Bowl. So I knew that those two games were going to be really tough. I thought that the first two were more of a gimme, not necessarily, but they just seemed to be more when it came to competition level, that was more winnable for Seattle.
Yeah.
So can't complain about 3-1, right? Like it's a great place to start. It's a great place for a new coaching staff to begin. It's a good place for the players to begin because you don't feel behind. And I think that that's a huge part of the mind game of the first part of the season is, you look at the Jaguars, they're behind. They're not digging themselves out of that hole. You have when you are 1-3 or even 2-2, you're like, you feel a little behind. So being 3-1, being at the top of the division, which is something none of us ever expected, that is not only good to stack those wins at the beginning of the season, but also I think it's a huge boost mentally for players and coaches too.
Yeah, you make a great point. I mean, there are markets in the NFL right now where fans are freaking out in places where, we consider them contenders. I'm actually reading stuff this week that there are people that want Jalen Hurts benched in Philadelphia, for just to cite one example, because they're 2-2 and that's a disappointment. So, yeah, to your point, it's 3-1 is 3-1, and you can't argue with that. And it puts them in first place and it gives you an advantage, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Do you feel like they missed an opportunity Monday, though? And we're going to talk about all the injuries and actually what happened on the field. But the narrative up until that game was there were a lot of people nationally and even among Seattle's fan base that weren't willing to take them quite seriously yet because of the injuries and the quarterbacks they had faced and the level of competition leading up till that point. I think by one metric, the easiest schedule in the league through the first 3 weeks. And so they had an opportunity to make a statement on Monday. Do you think they missed that opportunity? Do you think that was a failure in some way among those that watch this team?
During the game, I would have agreed with that statement. Going back and watch it, because you're in the emotion of the game and you're like, look at Geno is just killing it. This offense is doing so good. What is going on? And you're just like, just missing. But at the same time, going back and rewatching it, I think that there was an opportunity there to really show who they were, win or lose, because it is a very good team. This was an opportunity for, we call him Captain New Coach, but that's just no. So Mike Macdonald did come in and put a stamp and say, see, defense, see this. Yeah. And what happened? The opposite happened. And we had Jared Goff have a perfect game. And that, I think, is what is disappointing. And that, yes, injuries, every team has injuries. And so, but I just think that was the missed opportunity. Even if they had lost, they could have come out and shown exactly what they had. Instead, I think what was shown in the team was how good this offense could be. And that is not something you expected out of this particular head coach. Now, I know people love Ryan Grubb, and I think that he put together an amazing game plan. I loved the coaching in this game, but I think that the missed opportunity would have been for him to be like defense. And that just was a huge miss because that didn't happen in any way, shape, or form. And people can say a million different reasons. There's a million different excuses, but to have a quarterback have a perfect game, there's just something that's very bothersome about that.
And I know, especially for you, because you love defense, it's part of your brand, right? Yeah. You love defense. How hard is it to watch a game like that, given your penchant for the defensive side of the ball?
Oh, well, I was on vacation in Montana with some family, and I was just pacing, and I was just so annoyed by the whole thing. And my son, who is also a huge Seahawks fan, he was just like, this is hard to watch. I'm like, it is hard to watch. And I think that's because we've seen bad defense for a few years now. So it was like creeping back in. That nervousness was coming back. But it was the execution of it, right, Dan? It was like you could kind of see what they were doing. And Ben Johnson pulled up a beautiful game, and they all credit to the Lions. I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying the Lions didn't deserve this, because I have them going to the Super Bowl. I think they are a beautifully coached team with a ton of talent, but just the execution of the defense was so off. And the missed tackles drive me crazy probably more than anything. They happen, but this was just a mess to me. And And a lot of people jumped all over me for saying that. I'm like, this defense. Now, I'm not saying the defense in the whole, because we've seen it do really well. This defense for this game was a mess. And it was just tough to watch because you knew they should be and could be better.
Yeah, I think that's the disappointing thing for me. I finally got a chance to go back and watch the condensed version of the game, every play last night. And, I mean, your mind plays tricks on you. It's usually the case after a loss that you feel better after watching it. But in this case, I did. And because when you look at the box score, yeah, he completed 18 out of 18, but under 300 yards. I mean, it was 6 yards per play.
They were short.
He wasn't. Yeah, he was throwing the underneath stuff. You even heard Mike Macdonald this week say, we played more zone this week, and that was the plan. We just didn't come up and tackle like we should have. It was, and even running the football, it felt like, as you're watching it, that they were just gouging us in the run game. It felt like the New England game, but the Patriots ran for 185 yards, and Detroit barely ran for 100. It was the big plays. It was the 70-yarder to Jameson Williams. It was the David Montgomery little swing pass where Witherspoon came up and hit him for what would have been a loss, bounced off him, and he ran for 40 yards.
Right.
It was those big plays and big moments that, at the end of the day, even given the fact that we're missing 5 starters in the front 7, our entire starting defensive line, that this game came down to 2 or 3 plays that, if they had gone a different way, if DK doesn't fumble that ball to give the Lions a 2-score lead to start with,
if the calls had been given like they should have
down play, the OPI, which I can see either side of it, doesn't happen.
Right.
It's that they had a chance to win this game, and that's what I'm taking away from this game, is despite everything working against them, that they had a chance to win this game.
I'm not as convinced they had a chance to win this game. Yes, if you just look at it on paper, they absolutely had a chance to win this game. They did. And you're right. It was just a few missed calls here and there. I think what really bothered me the most was the fact that it seemed like every time the Lions touched the ball, they scored. Instead of having some big stops, instead of having that, which there were some, but they're overshadowed. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And so that is what is hard, is that there seem to be starts and stops in good play, right? Instead of a consistent. If they've been consistently crappy, we'd be like, woo, they had the wrong plan for this. But you could see the moments almost where, oh, there it is. There it is. My big thing with Dan, and I'd love your opinion on this, because I once again got a lot of backlash from people when I voiced this opinion, is that I truly believe that in order to have a team that's going to either go deep in the playoffs or even contend for a championship, you have to have that depth, and you have to have the depth of talent. And I didn't see that. Yes, injuries happen to everybody, and so you have to be prepared for that. And they had all week to prepare these players. Yeah. I understand the talent level is not going to be as high, but they're just it just was. There were too many players who had not great games, right? And
yeah.
So, I don't know,
and my take on that is there's injuries, and then there's mass injuries. I mean,
that's fair.
I've had Lions fans come back at me this week and say, hey, we had injuries too. And they did. They had some key injuries. But you're missing Derek Barnes. You've still got Jack Campbell and Alex Anzalone, 2 outstanding inside linebackers. You're missing Marcus Davenport, but he'd only played 3 games with the team. He's a free agent addition. And you've got Aiden Hutchinson. I mean, you have an elite player there, still healthy. Right. The equivalent for the Lions would have been if Hutchinson had also been out, because the Seahawks weren't just missing their starting defensive line; they were missing their 4 best defenders. And what was missing in that second group was nobody that could penetrate, nobody that could collapse the pocket, nobody that demanded a double team. It was a bunch of guys just trying to play their gap. And Detroit has too many explosive players on offense that the margin for error is so thin that if you just miss one guy, he's gone. And I saw that as happening. I'm not saying that it's a guarantee that if those guys had been there for the Seahawks, they would have won.
Oh, no.
Man, I would love to get another shot at that team a little more fully healthy. And even the Frank Ragnow, he was out, and he's one of the best, probably the second best center in the NFL. I think we all agree. Creed Humphrey's the first one. As painful as that name is to hear for Seahawk fans.
Yes, it is.
But Graham Glasgow is no slouch, and to move him over rather than just go with their second guy, made a lot of sense for them. I do think that we're going to see a different defense. Now, let me ask you this. I think Mike Macdonald did say at one point at the end of the week, he said, if it was the Super Bowl, maybe we're talking about some of these guys being able to go. With the Giants coming up this week, if any of these guys are borderline where they could play, do you still hold them out knowing that the Niners are coming in here in 8 days?
What would I do?
Yeah.
What do I think he'll do? What would I do? No, they play. You need to stack the wins where you can get them, right?
Okay.
And I think that, and I know not everyone's going to agree with that, but the Niners is no guarantee. In fact, it's less than a guarantee, right? Even if you play all those guys, that is a different monster. And so therefore, and I know you have to beat the Niners in order to win the division, but is the division really the point this year? Or is it to get to the playoffs, right? You have to, is there a world, and this is going to sound pessimistic, and I'm not pessimistic. I'm trying to be a little bit realist here instead of my normal little peppy.
Bring it. We like the objectivity on this show.
The thing of it is, do you really think that you can top the Niners with the way the team stands right now? Do I think the Niners opened the window? Yeah. I do think they opened the window, and I do think that there's an opportunity. But if you are looking at this as objectively, I think, as you can, you need to stack the wins that you can get. You need to win where you can, right? In order to have the best record at the end of the season. So therefore, the Giants, if you look at that defense, that's not necessarily a given. They have a very good defense that I think a lot of people are just overshadowing because of Daniel Jones. And so I think that you stack those wins as you can. Now, the question really is, had these guys not been injured and they were just rolling through the season, they would never hold them out to just for the Niners. So no, I say you play them. I think that you have to get the wins where you can. And I think in order to do that, you need to play your best players.
Yeah. And I think what's more likely to happen, and McDonald even said it on his coach's show this week, they're all on different timelines. I think, we think of them as a group, right? We want that whole group back, but I think, one or two of them maybe is ready to go this week. It sounded like Jerome Baker was close, but up front, it seems to me like, Maffei's the guy that he's not dealing with ligament damage. It was a contusion. It was a bruised knee. Maybe he's ready to go, but, is this game scary at all? Is this one of those kind of trappy type games where maybe you're afraid you're overlooking the Giants because of some of the deficiencies they have, because of questions at quarterback, knowing the Niners are coming 4 days later?
I think maybe the fans are, but I don't believe the coaching staff will, to be honest with you. We have to remember that, yes, the Giants are kind of, they're like the Panthers and the Jaguars right now, right? Like it's something that fans don't worry too much about. However, if you go and look at their stats and you look at their defense, Dexter Lawrence is a serious dude to deal with, right? Like you have to deal with that. Yeah. You have this group of defensive players. Now on offense, you don't worry near as much, which is a good thing because our defense is the one that's mostly affected right now. So I think that the coaching staff is going to be more prepared for that defensive side of the ball, for the Giants defense. Maybe worry less about the offense because I think we all know that Geno can keep up. The Giants have what? Do they have 7 or 8 touchdowns this year? Maybe even less. It's not many. I know that. So I think
Neighbors has almost all of them.
Right. So luckily our cornerbacks are good. Well, they weren't necessarily this week.
Well, we'll see.
Anyway, don't get me started. Yeah.
I think this game, in some ways, may be the most important game they play this year. And I don't mean that in the, the next game is always the most important.
Sure.
I mean, we're going to see how this team, how these players, and how this coaching staff responds to their first loss and to an important loss, a loss that you wanted to make a statement, right? In that atmosphere against that team, the team that you're chasing. And I think the other thing that gets lost here a little bit too is you could see how close those teams were in some areas, and yet the Lions have been working on this for 3 years. We're 4 games into the Mike Macdonald era. And so we want to see how they respond, because in the first 2/3 of the Pete Carroll era here, that was always what they were really good at. They'd hang a bad loss on the schedule every once in a while, but man, they'd get ticked off. they'd put a better plan together, teachable moments, all that, and they'd bounce back the next week. You had so much confidence in how they were going to come back from a win, not so much the last few years. And so let's see how they respond against a team in a game that some might view as a trap game, right? A game that I haven't seen the spread yet, but I'm sure they're favored pretty comfortably to win this game. And it's a I would categorize this as a game they should win. So let's see how they respond.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I will say that it has been brought up by a bunch of media people how angry Mike Macdonald was after this game in his press conference. One reporter called him seething, like he was just angry. That is the difference between, there's been a lot of Pete Carroll versus Mike Macdonald. I'm so sick of that. It's like, they're two very different people.
It's hard to avoid, but yeah, I
get the comparisons
and then not.
But it's usually Pete versus in the fan base, and I hate that. So, but I think the interesting thing is that is the difference in this coach. Pete would be mad, you'd never know it. He was irritated, but you never really got the angry Pete. And Macdonald being mad, I think, is going to be what these players need. They need that. They need their coach pissed off at them, right? Like, I think that's going to be really good. And hopefully that will motivate the coaching staff and everyone to really step up this week, no matter who their opponent is. Yes, it's the New York Giants. Yes, the Giants aren't the best team, but at the same time, you need to win this game, and probably have it be a statement win would then completely change the trajectory for the Thursday night Niners game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Although, they could go out and win 40-10, and most likely the narrative for many people coming out of that game would be, yeah, but it's Daniel Jones. So it's one of those games that can't really
more for themselves, not necessarily the media. Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah. And the thing that I liked about McDonald's response to this game is, and especially the next morning, the coach's show after he'd watched the film and everything else, is he still talks in terms, I like the language he uses, and he uses different language, right? Like when he said after the game, he said, we didn't deny them the football. I thought I'm like, that's a phrase I've never heard before. That's kind of cool. But he talks still in terms of the process and the big picture, and it's one step at a time. And to your point, like, is the Super Bowl the goal? Is the division the goal? I don't think they have those types of kind of finite goals this year. It's about getting, one brick at a time and getting better each week. I do believe, you mentioned the 49ers a little earlier, I do believe that the pieces are there that we can make up the gap this year. Don't know if it's going to happen by a week from tomorrow.
Sure.
Right. But it's removing that direction if we can get all our horses. There's a feeling that's different in that area. Now, the one thing they do have going for them, you touched on at the very beginning, is this offense, right? And what we're seeing so far with, 4 games into the Ryan Grubb era, interesting to contrast that with what we're seeing in Chicago right now. But
that's a nice way to put it.
Right? Seahawks ran 78 plays on Monday night. They had the ball for 10 minutes longer. You take away that fumble and you wonder how much more imbalanced that would have been. That despite, injuries and issues on the offensive line, rotating a guy in at right guard, playing your third string right tackle, a center still just 4 games, into coming off an ACL, going up against a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, that they ran 78 plays. They were dead last in the NFL last year, number of plays run. They're up to 3rd this year already after 4 weeks. And at the forefront of that is Geno Smith. Are you sensing the narrative starting to change around Geno Smith finally?
I do. The funny thing is, I think that within the fan base and people who paid attention, the narrative about Geno really changed over the last couple of years. Like, they got it, right? But to the generals, the general fan base out there, he was still just Geno Smith. So yes, I think this year that people are starting to understand what type of quarterback he is. They're not trying to say that he is Patrick Mahomes, these people, and he's not Daniel Jones. They understand what type of quarterback he is, how good he is, where his strengths are, where his strengths aren't. And that makes you understand and I'm not saying greatness like he's an elite quarterback, but just the greatness of how he plays this game. I do think too, there's a fit there with Ryan Grubb
Yeah.
that really seems to be working. And it is in stark contrast to what has been happening in Seattle the last 2 years. They are so offensively focused. I think it's funny, though, that, Ryan Grubb came in and said, oh, we're going to be a run-based team. And yet Geno is having these career record numbers, right? And I love that. And I don't want to discount what Kenneth Walker did in this game, too. He was amazing. And I think actually Charbonnet is actually a really good running back, too. So I like the running backs. But I think between the two of them, they have 400 yards or something in 4 games. That's amazing, right? So that's what you want. Or not quite 400 yards. I think it was just under, but, and so that's great. But I do feel like the way Ryan Grubb is using the pieces that he has, though he's using DK and JSN and even Tyler, and the way that he is mixing things up, it's just so refreshing, Dan, compared to what we had seen for the last few years and what they're seeing in Chicago now. And I mean, there's a direct link, obviously. And so I find that as a defense lover, it's nice to have a fun offense to watch also, because then your defense is not on the field for 90% of the game.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is fun. That's the word I keep coming back to, because, I think when people want to critique offensive coordinators, the term you hear thrown around the most is play calling, right? And I think there's a little too much focus on play calling. The way I evaluate offensive coordinators is consistency, how they attack the field, all areas of the field, and personnel usage. Are you getting the most out of your guys? And that's where my frustrations have come from over the last several years here in Seattle, is I didn't feel like those boxes were being checked. Right. And early in this game, man, I was not happy, because I thought, you're coming out in that environment, in that stadium, against that team, and with Hutchinson coming off the edge and everything else, try to establish the run early. And it was the exact opposite of that. They ran it one time in the first quarter. And I was screaming some things at the TV. I wasn't happy with Mr. Grubb. But in seeing how the game progressed, in going back and watching it again, and then in hearing obviously the coach's comments and some of the players afterwards, that was a specific intention at the beginning of the game there to try to attack the Lions where they were weakest, and that was in their secondary, and with what they felt they did the best, and that was throwing the football at Geno Smith. And so going back and looking at it, especially given the fact that when they needed to shift and start running the football more for the 3rd out of 4th games now, the New England game being the outlier, right? When they wanted to establish the run, they were able to. Do you feel like that offensive line is starting to come together a little bit? No. Really?
I mean, yes and no.
You don't think it's better now than it was?
I think that it's better from the beginning of the season. I think it's better as they get more comfortable within the season, right? Because as you go along, things get better. Yeah. I still feel like that pocket collapses pretty regularly. It's not the disaster it was last year. Let's put it that way, right? It is better. I just keep wanting more. And Bradford was better in this game. We don't have 7,000, penalties off of Bradford this game. That was really nice. I would love to see Abe Lucas come back. I don't think that's happening anytime soon.
I don't know. He posted another Instagram story.
I know. He was working out outside of the facility. I mean, but he's outside the facility still. And that just, I don't know. I don't trust that. Right. Let's just put it that way. But, I think that I will say, if they're not necessarily, I wouldn't use the word better, but they're getting more confident in what they're supposed to be doing. And I feel like, and the center play has been very good. So I think that is where you can say that maybe they're getting better.
I will say this.
I hate to put a stamp on it.
I know. And I do think it was a major, major win that they didn't allow a sack to Aiden Hutchinson. Now,
that's nice.
During the game, that felt pretty good. But then you go look at the PFF grades, you look at the pressure numbers, and my goodness, he was off the charts, right? Yeah. He was affecting every single play. That is without a doubt. You talk about the pocket collapsing, and I think that's a concern where there's been so much focus on, just not allowing those big breakdowns, right? Those quick penetrations like we saw week 1, especially. Yeah. I'm not so sure how I feel about Connor Williams at this point.
Oh, okay.
I saw him. I was watching the All-22 yesterday, focusing on Christian Haynes, because you mentioned Anthony Bradford. I think Christian Haynes outplayed him. I think the team was better when he was on the field. I think he looked like maybe he was more comfortable, and we might see that change happening sooner than later. But as I'm watching Haynes, I'm seeing Williams get pushed back a lot.
Okay.
Vulnerable to bull rushes. And, I'm not, it's not an indictment on him. He's coming off an ACL. Maybe he just doesn't have that strength back. But I do think that we may be seeing a changing of the guard.
An actual change.
Sorry. It just, I had to say
happens. It happens. Those dad jokes sneak right out sometimes.
Yeah.
You have to think about it. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I do think you're right. If I really think about it objectively, they're getting better in spots, and Cross still looks good. Most of the, you know what I mean? And so we still have that. I'm wondering if Geno is adapting to the way they're playing a little bit more. I think Geno almost deserves a little more credit there. But sure. in the play calling, right? Like they watch it and they see what happens. Okay, this is where we're lacking today. And he adjusts. And I love the adjustment out of these coaching staffs. It's so nice to see the adjustments. I wish they'd adjusted a little more in the second half but of this last game. But, again, it was the Lions. We got to give them credit for that. But, you think about the adjustments they've done in the other games. It's just so good. So credit to them for that too.
Hey, when you look at the names that BetUS has as their defensive rookie of the year favorites, good time to buy low on Byron Murphy II, obviously out right now with that hamstring injury. Don't know what his timeline is yet and when he'll be back. But check out the odds you can get right now over at BetUS. Plus 1,400 on Murphy to win defensive rookie of the year. If you want to take advantage of that, sign up for your account today. And BetUS is going to give you a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit and 125% on your second and third deposits up to $2,000. Just go over to BetUS, sign up for your account, and use the promo code YouTube150. Meanwhile, the folks over at Manscaped introducing their newest innovation, the Chairman Pro Electric Foil Shaver. This game-changing tool brings the luxury of a professional shave right into your home. Whether you're after that daily silky smooth finish or prefer to maintain that 5 o'clock shadow, the Chairman Pro Electric Foil Shaver is your go-to for precision and style every time. Head over to manscaped.com and join the over 11 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by using promo code Seahawks for 20% off and free shipping. That's right. You can get the Chairman Pro Electric Foil Shaver right now for 20% off and free shipping by using Seahawks as the promo code over at manscaped.com. I mentioned stressing all parts of the field. And if you looked at Geno Smith's pass chart, his spray chart this week, it's pretty impressive. It's everywhere, right? It looks like somebody said, what was the name? I was thinking George Brett, but it looked like a George Brett hit chart, right?
Yeah.
To use a Kansas City. Yeah. You're wearing the Royal shirt there. And so it's, and then someone came back and said, yeah, but everything is less than 10 yards. I'm like, okay. Right.
Yeah, but didn't we used to bitch that Russell Wilson couldn't throw short across?
Right. He would still hold on to the ball. That's the adjustment Geno Smith made. Something clicked about how he finished really strong. Last 7 games last year. It just seemed like his internal clock changed and he was able to really see it. And to that critic, I would say, okay, that's the way we have to play for now. But if and when, hopefully, that offensive line can start to give him more time, you're going to start to see those explosive plays. There was a tweet that went kind of viral this week on Twitter with somebody ripping Geno and saying he's regressed and using as evidence, don't know if you saw this one, as their proof, the fact that he only has a 4 touchdown to 4 interception ratio this year, and that touchdown to interception ratio is everything. And even though he's leading the NFL in touchdown or in yardage, that means that he's regressed. I think that's a product of how quickly he has to get rid of the ball. Mm-hmm. We're running for touchdowns. I think we have 7 rushing touchdowns this year, and we had 9 all of last year. I don't know if my numbers are exact there, but they're close. That's how we're cashing in the red zone. Those touchdowns are going to come. I'm sure of it. I think because you can see it. There's plays where he makes a 10, 15-yard completion, but the first thing he's doing is he's looking downfield.
8.
He wants the big one.
8 rushing touchdowns.
There you go.
Nice.
There you go. I do think one last thing about Geno as we look ahead to the Thursday night game coming up. I think one thing that can really impact the narrative, the most fuel for Geno Smith critics is hasn't won a playoff game, and doesn't really have that signature win. Right? I think the best opportunity for him to get that is a week from tomorrow.
Oh.
He hasn't beaten the 49ers.
I know. I don't know that he's going to this time either. I have a lot of respect for the 49ers team, that defense especially. People can go on and on about Brock Purdy all they want. I don't care. If that team didn't have that defense,
49er fans would not agree with you. They're worried about sending that defense down there right now.
And I get it. I'm talking previously over the years. Yes. So I do think that's where the vulnerability is this year, especially with the increase of the Seahawks offense.
They got some guys up front still, and Fred Warner's as good as it comes. Yeah.
God, I know. It makes me a little jealous. But at the same time, divisional games are so tough to call, right? Because look, the Rams, who are a match unit of third stringers and a complete and utter mess and a quarterback who can't throw the dang ball right now, managed to beat the Niners. And so I think that is where a lot of that, the divisional games are always a little wonky. We've seen that 49ers are vulnerable this year. So it's, will they capitalize on that? Will these injuries come back? And so, if they hold some of these guys out because they're just not quite ready and don't want it to get worse, I'd understand it with the Giants. I still think you need to stack that as a win. But if that's where they're at and they think they're that close to beating the Niners, I would understand if they decided to hold out some players just a little bit. But at the same time, I think it's going to be a very tall order to beat San Francisco. Is this I'm so sorry. I have so many schedules floating around in my head from covering the whole league. Is this the Seahawks in Seattle, right? The Thursday night in Seattle. Helpful.
Yep.
Very, very helpful.
Throwbacks. Yeah.
Because how loud
66 degrees, beautiful conditions. Yeah. It's going to be fun.
All right.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We got the Giants coming up this week first, right? You mentioned that you cover the whole league over there at our turf.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the NFC.
Mm-hmm.
Are you convinced about the Vikings? Are they for real?
Oh, I think it's a little hard to say no right now. After this going 4-0, I'm like 2-0. Yeah. 3-0. Well, it's pretty impressive. 4-0. Ooh. You have to look at their competition and a few things, but I really am impressed with Green Bay and Jordan Love coming back in those numbers. I think that we as Seahawks fans are annoyed that Sam Darnold is doing as well as he is, because he's always been kind of a pain in the ass for us. But I do think that they are an amazingly coached team. They have a lot of talent in areas of need, like along the lines and things like that. So I do think that they are definitely a for real team. Do I think they're a Super Bowl winning team? I don't know that I would go that far. But we'll have to see how the rest of the season stacks up, obviously with injuries and things. But I do think I had them coming in last in their division. I missed this completely. I just assumed that having your backup be the whole, for the whole season. But now I'm wondering if JJ McCarthy ever gets his job back, because Sam Darnold is playing very well.
Yeah, I think he does, and I think Darnold ends up, moving on and getting paid this offseason. They're fun to watch because I'm a big believer in Kevin O'Connell. I just think he's a guy that you talk about, to steal a John Schneider phrase, he tilts the room. He just exudes. I just love listening to that guy talk about ball.
That whole coaching staff
got some McVay qualities. It's not a shocker that they've worked together. And I love stories like Darnold's. It's not too dissimilar. It happened sooner for him, but it's not too dissimilar from what Geno went through. The redemption stories from these quarterbacks, because we just, it never ends. We see it time and time again. We see teams force a quarterback pick at the top of the draft. We see them play them too early before the pieces are around them. We're seeing it again with Bryce Young right now.
Yep.
It's really unfortunate. And I feel like there's a long line of top 10 quarterbacks littered along the side of the road that never got a second chance because they just were immediately given up on, that probably had the talent to succeed. And so I'm all for seeing Sam Darnold have some success.
Me too. I truly, there was a quote. Oh my gosh. I can't remember who it was. Was it Brookie? I can't remember if it was Brooks. I can't remember who it was, but there was a quote on Twitter last week that said that organizations, it's far more common for organizations to fail a rookie quarterback or a new quarterback than the quarterback to fail the organization.
Yep.
And I think that there's just example after example after example. Baker Mayfield is a great example. Geno's a great example. There's so many so I hope that Bryce Young, someone comes in and says, give him to us. They sit him for 2 years, and then we can really see what they can develop and see what they have. I think New Orleans would be a great place for him to do that. Like, there's so many places that he could go and develop. Does that mean it's a guarantee? No, but at least I think every quarterback deserves that second chance, because you don't know if it's the organization or the 10 million coaches that he's been through or whatever it is, or was it his talent? So a second chance is the only place you're going to see that with a different organization. Not just sit him on the bench behind Andy Dalton.
Well, and you have to wonder, as we move forward, you start to see more and more of these stories.
Mm-hmm.
Will some organizations start to view the quarterback situation differently? I mean, ever since the Seahawks traded Russell Wilson, there have been some who thought that process wasn't ever going to be complete until we commit to a young quarterback at some point. But now, I'm not so sure. Let me ask you this, and I didn't mean to ask another Geno-based question, but if you had a choice looking at 25 and 26 and how you feel about Geno Smith now and how he's playing, would you rather see him extended and have him be your guy for the next couple of years? Or if you could only choose one option, would you rather draft a guy and go with a young quarterback?
No, keep Geno and extend him, barring major injury sometime without the rest of this year. So obviously, if you take that out of the equation, no, I would prefer to keep Geno for at least 1 to 2 more years.
And certainly money plays a part in it. And again, I wonder if organizations are going to start to see, hey, the risk of drafting a guy high, but I can get one of these other guys that can come in and play effectively and that we can win with, and I'm going to get him for a lot less money. I'm not going to have to pay Trevor Lawrence type money for a guy that's not a sure thing. I'm not going to have to commit a high draft pick. Meanwhile, I can go draft him a left tackle.
Exactly.
Right? Or someone to keep him upright.
Round out the whole rest of the team.
Malik Neighbors, I wonder if we're going to see a little bit of a shift.
I also am wondering if we're going to shift back at some point, although money, again, plays a huge factor in this, of you draft a quarterback and sit him for a year.
Yeah.
You draft a quarterback and don't make him be the one immediately, because we've seen that does not work out near as well. And then you look at Love and you look at Patrick Mahomes, he's that for a year. You know what I mean? And people forget that he didn't come out and start right away. And there's so many examples where, okay, you draft him, you sit him behind a vet somewhere, and then let him play. Let him just adjust to the NFL. I'm wondering, I don't ever think that will be the norm, but I'm just wondering if we're going to begin to see it a little bit more often.
You have to wonder if McCarthy doesn't get hurt if we do see that this year in Minnesota.
Yeah.
If Darnold gets off to that same start, and if they commit to that, it's right. I don't know. It's maybe we'll see it in New England, because even though that team is bad, and even though Jacoby Brissett is not making plays and not moving that offense, and now they lose their starting center for the season, it's there has to be some temptation to go to Drake May there. But what a terrible, terrible situation to put him into.
Yeah. So then he can just get murdered behind the lines, lose all of his confidence, and then not ever be the player he could be. And that's, I think, what you saw that with Zach Wilson. You see it all the time. And so I'm wondering if, no, let him sit, let him acclimate, let him learn this, and then see what he can do. I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't more common going forward.
I mean, meanwhile, there's always exceptions. We're seeing it work with Jaden Daniels, certainly seeing it work, but I think now we looked at that team last year. It's interesting to note that some people kind of brushed off Sam Howell leading the league in interceptions as, well, they had a bad offensive line. It's pretty much that same offensive line this year that's keeping Jaden Daniels upright, and he's doing some really good things. So, and then you have a mixed bag in Chicago with Caleb Williams. So,
don't get me started. I'm not a huge Caleb Williams fan, but I love Jaden Daniels.
Who are your favorite players on this Seahawks team so far through 4 games?
Well, I think Mafe has probably made the biggest jump in people's eyes. I think that people are we saw this in moments last year, right? Like, you saw what he could do sometimes last year. And so I think that was, I think that he's really fun. Byron seems to be living up to the hype of being a first round pick. Unfortunately, when he got
I
hurt.
hope he gets back soon. Yeah.
Yeah, I really hope so too. I don't want him to derail his progress. That's my biggest thing. It's like he needs that continuation. But I love, God, Nathan's going to kill me, but I love Kenneth Walker. I love the way he runs. I think it's super fun to watch. On defense, you have Williams, who is just a stud. I can't wait for Nwosu to get back. He's been one of my favorite players for a long time now. Well, since he's been in Seattle, and I just love the energy he brings. But I think the player that has really captured the most of my attention and honestly surprised this year has been Julian Love. Like I am so impressed with the way he plays. He flies all over that field. I was so bummed when he went out this last game. I'm like, oh, we're screwed, because I think he's the glue. I think that he is, how Bobby Wagner was always the glue of the defense.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone kind of hovered on him. I feel that from him. And I think that he has become probably one of my favorite players on the team because of that. Because, I'm a defense girly.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm all in on Derek Hall.
He's been real fun. I know.
Yeah. I feel like he's taking a Mafe type step in the second year. Like things are slowing down for him. And that guy, he's just a grown man. I mean, that sack he had where he beats Taylor Decker is one of the biggest studs at tackle in the league. And he just, beat him with a one-arm bull rush and then sacks Jared Goff with one arm. And we all learned that you can horse collar a quarterback in the pocket, apparently.
Yeah, I didn't know that rule.
None of us knew
I didn't know that rule at all. I'm glad they explained it, because I was like, oh, we're getting a flag. Well,
just setting the edge and chasing guys downfield, and that's a lot of fun. And then on offense, it was really cool to see AJ Barner have a good game. There was some criticism in training camp from some people that were observing practice that, gosh, he wasn't a real fluid athlete. Right. That he at one point, one person described watching him run as, kind of running in sand. But man, he's found a way to contribute, and I'm not so sure. Seahawks went out and signed Farrell Brown in free agency because they said he's one of the best blocking tight ends in the league. I'm not so sure AJ Barner is not better right now.
Yeah. He had a really good game. I need to see a couple more games like that to really get behind him. But yeah, it was impressive to see that he could do it. Right. And so we need to see more of that.
And what was fun was, he had the play where it wasn't the touchdown. It was his other catch where he tried to hurdle the guy. Right. And then he comes back on the very next play and just crushes the guy on his block and springs Charbonnet on a 10-yard run. It was a really cool little 2-play sequence from a tight end. I love those guys that can play both ways. Who are your biggest disappointments so far? I know we try to keep it positive on this show, but
yeah, it's tough because I'm not really disappointed in any, because it's only 4 games in. And so I try and give a little, I always say you need to get to game 6 before you really know, but I'm going to get eaten for this. And I know he's still a really good player, but I want we saw some sparks from Witherspoon. And I thought in this Lions game, he had some play, and see, that's just it. He's still a great player, right? But I just expected fireworks out of this kid this year, and I don't think that I've gotten that this year. Doesn't mean he's not good. I don't want people to come for my head. I'm not saying he's not good. I was just like, he's going to kill everybody he touches. I don't know. I just expected that from him this year, and I haven't really gotten that. That's
a tough one. Expectations when you're drafted 5th are so high. And then he exploded on the scene last year. His first couple of games, that Giants game, he had the pick 6 and he's running around hitting guys. And I'm not so sure that they haven't really figured out what to do with him yet.
Yes. I had that conversation on Monday during the game. It's like, what do they want from him most? You can use him all over, but what are they looking for the most out of him? I think they're still trying to figure that out.
I feel like he played outside more on Monday, and maybe that's not his forte because they're using a lot of their safeties kind of closer to the line of scrimmage. That I don't know. Early, and I meant to look back and kind of try to find the exact timeline on this, but I know when Mike Macdonald came back to Baltimore as defensive coordinator after his 1 year at Michigan, and Kyle Hamilton was a rookie, that the first part of his rookie season, there was some discussion of him being a little bit of a disappointment. And it took it took them kind of switching his role and bringing him up kind of more into that robber position and playing some nickel and close to line of scrimmage. And then he really exploded and they got the most out of him. And so maybe they just haven't figured out the best place
Tweaking
to put
that a
him.
little bit still.
Yeah.
That could be.
Also, Monday night was tough because we just weren't getting any pressure.
Right.
You know, those guys were having to cover more. I will say this on the rewatch, the play that sticks out to most of us where he bounces off David Montgomery, right? I didn't catch this live, but somebody retweeted it yesterday and said, man, I love Witherspoon. I can't wait to watch this guy develop. And I thought, is he being sarcastic because it was the Montgomery play? No, after he bounced off Montgomery, he hops up, he fights through traffic, and he almost got there at the end on the other sideline to be involved in the play. He still got up and chased that play down.
I didn't notice that either. Yeah.
He's tenacious. And I think it's going to come for him. I think it's going to happen. I think we need to play some better quarterbacks, and that may sound weird, right?
Yeah.
But with our full assortment of horses, if
for sure,
where the front end and the back end are a little bit more married and we're getting some pressure and those guys have opportunities to make plays, I think it's going to happen for him.
I'm not worried about him at all.
Yeah.
I think it's more my expectation versus what we have seen. And it could be just, again, who we're playing. We're getting a lot of the run game. You know, in the Patriots game, they ran down our throat, right? And so you don't get it quite as much. But I just expected him to be insane this year. And so it's more my expectation than anything else. But he still is easily one of the best players on the team, if not the best player on the team, without question, for sure.
My biggest disappointment, and really, I think looking at it now, and I intend in the next few days to kind of go back and sort of recap the off season and what worked and what didn't. Maybe it's the one move that hasn't worked out through 4 games. I think Noah Fant is just a guy.
Really? Okay.
And to give him the 2 year, I was excited about it because I thought his athletic profile is such that you can use this guy down the field in a way that he hasn't been through, his Seahawks career. They did in Denver. Use him more as a receiving threat, a mismatch on some linebackers, right? He's had some drops.
Yeah.
He's whiffed on
some good catches.
blocks,
Yeah.
Penalties. He had the 6 catches last week against Miami. You thought, okay, that was the best usage, but I'm not so sure that Brady Russell couldn't have made those same plays.
Fair. Yeah. Once again, is that a guy, though, you just have to wait and see if they're figuring out how to use him? You know what I mean? Like, it's a little early, but at the same time, he's been here a minute, right? So, but new coaching staff, I don't know. You're right. I can see where just a guy, a dude that does his job, sort of thing. He's not going to be a standout. He's not going to be a superstar. And that's okay to have those players on the team. But in an important role like that, I could see where you'd want more from him for sure. But yeah. It's interesting. The offense, I'm having a hard time criticizing the offense because I think that they just have looked so good that I think it's hard to criticize them because I'm like, nope, whatever they're doing, it's working. Just leave it.
Yeah.
Just keep rolling with it.
And there's an expectation. There's the possibility that they can, crazy as it sounds, they can get better. That offensive line can get better. If forget about Abe Lucas, if even George Fant comes back healthy, right? When he comes off IR and is an upgrade at right tackle, if that offensive line just starts to give Geno a little bit more time, right? If Ken Walker stays healthy. And I was really encouraged. There were a couple of plays on Monday where Grubb ran out Charbonnet and Walker together in the same backfield. I think that's a really intriguing idea. I think this offense can get even better than they've been. Like I said, I think the touchdowns are going to come for Geno.
I think so too. Sorry, I was just checking my phone to make sure Devontae Adams hadn't been traded. Go ahead.
How do you feel about this Sunday? Do they win this one? Do they get to 4-1 as they get ready to face the Niners?
I think they do. I think they win this game. I think that I know how that the Giants defense can be really good, and I get that. And I know they have Singletary who does good things, and I know they have Malik Neighbors. I still just don't think that the offensive power is there, that Geno will be able to easily keep up with that. Even with their, above average defense and they have some good players there. So, but no, I think that Seattle, especially being at home, will happily win this Giants game and we'll continue that streak, right? Because we've been doing that for a while now. So, score prediction, I don't know if it'll be crazy high, although Seattle hasn't scored under 23 or 24 all season yet. So I think that that's pretty good.
I saw this. The 4 straight games of scoring 20 or more. It's the first time.
20 or more. Okay. Yeah. I knew
the first time they've done it since 2020 when Russ cooked and got off to that start, right? And
So
had those
gross.
first
Yeah.
7 or 8
Hot.
games where he went
Yeah.
nuts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
I can see this being, Seattle 24-27 and maybe 13-17 for the Giants in there a little bit. We'll see.
It'll be interesting to see. They haven't taken the ball away yet, other than, Bo Nix handing us a couple of.
Although Daniel Jones is really good at giving it away. So
Yeah.
maybe this will be that game.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we will see. And it's always good to have you on. We'll have you back at the halfway point.
Yep.
And we'll check in again. Our Turf, Real Hawk Talk. You can catch her in all those different places. Dayna, it's always great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. See you later, my friend.
Bye.
All right, what'd you think of that? Anything stand out to you? Always like the comments down below. 2 days after the fact, how are you feeling about that Monday night game? How are you feeling about this team going into Sunday's game against the New York Giants, a team that we haven't heard officially? Are they going to have Malik Neighbors? He did have some extra time. Remember, the Giants played on the Thursday night game last week, so they had a couple extra days to prepare for this one and rest up for it. Neighbors in concussion protocol. Hasn't been cleared yet, I don't think. You're worried about that Giants defense? What if the Seahawks have to go into Sunday's game with the exact same guys on defense they played against Detroit? Can they win? Can they get to 4-1 heading into the 49ers? Do you think this might be a trap game? We talked a little bit about that. How do you feel about it? Let me know in the comments below. As always, follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Coming up later this week, I'm going to do a breakdown of what I think the rest of the schedule is going to look like now. We know a little bit more about this team. I didn't do a game-by-game schedule prediction this year because there were so many unknowns and so many new things. But we'll check in and do that later this week, and then we'll do a formal up-close look at the numbers as the Giants and Seahawks get set to play in what looks to be perfect October conditions in the Northwest for a football game. The forecast is for no rain, clear skies, 69 degrees. That's going to be fantastic on Sunday. The more extended forecast looking pretty good for Thursday Night Football also, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Shout out again to BetUS for sponsoring this video. Thanks to the folks at the Blue Wire Network. Thanks to all of you for watching. Forever and always, go Hawks.